Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I'm going to answer one of the biggest questions about Mushoku Tensei, in terms of things that have happened in the anime so far. This does mean that there will be big spoilers, as this is stuff that's revealed far later in the series, some of it at the very end. But as always with the spoiler videos, I will keep things only to what I need to spoil to explain the topic at hand, which is how and why did the mass teleportation incident happen? This will also end up answering the question of why Rudeus Greyrat was reincarnated in this world in the first place. So yeah, very major spoilers ahead. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to please consider subscribing if you like this kind of content about Mushoku Tensei, as I put out regular videos about the series, as well as general anime content, and it really helps me out if you subscribe to the channel. And with the spoiler warning and the YouTuber stuff over with, let's talk about the mass teleportation incident, or mass displacement incident as it's known in some translations. As we saw in the anime, there was a glowing red gem in the sky for a few years before the incident took place, which Rudy noticed and talked to Eris's grandfather Sauros about. Sauros said he didn't know what it was, but it was best to think it was nothing bad. This is sadly ironic, as Sauros ended up being forced to take responsibility, in a political sense, for the disappearance of his region after the event, and was executed because of it. Still, powerful people all around the world began to notice mana gathering around the red gem, including Kishirika, the demon empress Rudius would later meet and get his demon eye from, and Perugius, who is the armoured dragon king and who lives in the sky castle Chaosbreaker. We haven't seen much of Perugius yet in the anime, but his main goal in life is to kill Laplace, a character whose lore I will leave for another video, but who is currently sealed, and who is expected to reincarnate about 80 years after Rudius was born. Perugius thinks the gathering of mana and the red gem may be the result of someone attempting to unseal Laplace, and so he sends one of his 12 familiars, Aramanthi, who can travel at the speed of light, to investigate and kill anyone who looks to be causing this phenomenon on sight. We see that Aramanthi finds Rudius, Eris and Ghislaine, who are outside of the city of Roa to test out Rudy's new stuff, by pure coincidence. But of course this looks bad to Aramanthi, and Ghislaine has to fight him. But then the big pillar of light comes and the mass teleportation incident occurs. While Rudius assumes for a long time that only the people at what was basically ground zero were affected, and that perhaps it was even only himself, Eris and Ghislaine, the teleportation incident actually took out the whole Fitoa region, including the city of Roa, where Rudy had been staying, and Buena village, where he grew up. He finds this out when he's reunited with Paul. Living beings were randomly teleported all over the world, and everything else was destroyed, leaving nothing but empty fields in the whole region. Many people died, either because they teleported into places full of dangerous monsters and couldn't defend themselves, or because they teleported to places where they'd die instantly anyway. There was nothing stopping people being teleported to high in the sky or deep in the ocean, inside rock or inside a volcano, so people died in a variety of interesting and horrible ways. Even the people who did end up in more hospitable places arrived with only the clothes on their back, and anything they were holding at the time, and given news travels very slowly in Mushoku Tensei's world, nobody would believe them about what happened. So many ended up being tricked, kidnapped, sold as slaves, and other various unfortunate fates. Plus, anyone who did manage to make it to their former homes would find them and all of their possessions gone. In short, it was a major catastrophe. Now, here is the first major spoiler I need to go into to talk about how it happened. There is a character named Orsted, the dragon god, who is actually in a kind of time loop that is 200 years long. I'll explain everything about him in another video in the next few days, as he'll be appearing in the anime very soon. But for now, the important thing is that he has seen this period of time in this world many times before, and yet the mass teleportation incident has never happened in any other loop. Another thing that has never happened before is Rudius being born. In every other loop Orsted has witnessed, Paul and Zenith's first child was stillborn, and they only had their 2 daughters. As Orsted investigates why such an unprecedented thing is happening this time around, he finds a girl in the wasteland, left behind by the calamity, and he saves her, and she travels with him for a while. This girl is named Nanahoshi Shizuka, and she's a Japanese girl who's been summoned to this world. Not reincarnated like Rudius, but summoned at her current age of 17. So more like, say, Subaru in ReZero. And she's not just anybody either. She's one of the teenagers Rudius saved from the truck when he died in his previous life. As with Orsted, there is a lot to talk about with Nanahoshi, and I'll make a video all about her soon. But for now, we just need to know that she was summoned when the mass teleportation incident occurred, and while she is as she is at the moment Rudius died in Japan, her summoning is 10 years after he was reincarnated. Now, Nanahoshi's situation is very different from Rudius's. Where Rudius was overjoyed to be granted a whole new life, and was born with a new family and a chance to grow up and learn about the world and magic as one of its citizens, Nanahoshi was pulled over all by herself, with no knowledge of the languages or customs of the world, and crucially, no ability to do magic. She also, for some reason, doesn't age here. Nanahoshi's only concern is how to get back to her old world, something Rudius never thinks about, because his life there was decisively over, and decisively worse than his life here. Orsted helps Nanahoshi, and she learns a lot from him, but she eventually ends up attending the Ranoa Magic University, where she's trying to study methods to get back home. She was also introduced to Perugius, who knows a lot about summoning and teleportation magic, which seem to be connected to each other, so her research is focused on that. Rudius meets her for the second time after his initial fight with Orsted, when he too is at the university, because he's looking into causes for the teleportation incident. It's worth noting that Rudius is mainly researching this because he was told by the man god or Hitagami that researching it would lead to a cure for his erectile dysfunction. And there's a lot more about that plotline in my video about Rudy's love life, if you're curious. Nanahoshi has a couple of good reasons to want to work with Rudius. One is that naturally she misses her old home, and he's someone she can talk to in Japanese about the old world, though he does notice a generation gap between them where he was in his 30s and she was a high school girl. It takes him a very long time to actually tell her he was the guy that was there when Truck-kun appeared, because he's still so ashamed of how he must have looked to her at that time. The other reason why Nanahoshi is interested in having Rudius help her, however, is that he has an extremely large mana capacity, and Nanahoshi, who can't use magic at all, needs a lot of mana to be poured into the magic circles she's experimenting with to try to find a way to cross back over to the old world. As they get to know each other, Nanahoshi explains her theory that the mass teleportation incident was caused by whatever summoned her. She also thinks that one or both of the 2 boys she was with when she was summoned may have been summoned too. Nanahoshi has been doing things that will make her famous in this world, like inventing stuff basically, which as an isekai character really just means bringing over ideas from Japan, and she's become well known and respected under the name Silent Seven Star, which is an allusion to the meaning of her Japanese name that she thinks anyone who knew her and was also isekai'd would understand, helping them to find her. She even becomes a Class A member of the Mages Guild, despite not being able to use magic, as a result of her innovations. This also helps her gain access to knowledge and people who may be able to help her in her ultimate goal of finding a way home. Now, eventually, after many promising stages of experimentation, Nanahoshi is able to construct a very elaborate magic circle that should allow her to travel back to her old world. Rudius even gives her letters to give to his family if she makes it back to Japan, but it fails, more than once. Nanahoshi's theory about this is that she was actually summoned by someone in the future, because as evidenced by her coming over 10 years later than Rudius was reincarnated, people from that moment in Japan did not appear at the same moment of time in this world. She reasons that the other Japanese boy she's looking for, Akihito, will probably appear in the future for the same reason. She therefore thinks that she won't be able to go home until after some future event she has to be involved with, because the future here is taking priority over the past. Nanahoshi is also in a strange situation where the mana in this world was making her sick. Rudius and the others did manage to find a medicine that will keep her symptoms at bay, but her condition can't be cured. And so Perugius arranged that one of his familiars, who has the power to stop time for someone, will keep her in a form of suspended animation. She only wakes up for 1 day a month, so time is passing for her a lot more quickly than it is for Rudius and the other characters. Perugius is from the very long-lived dragon race, and Nanahoshi doesn't age anyway, so this will presumably mean that in the future she will be able to meet with Akihito, do whatever it is she needs to do to make the future happen as it was supposed to, and then go home. This is basically the situation she's still in when Rudius' story, and therefore Mushoku Tensei as a series, comes to an end. It's very likely that Nanahoshi's story will continue in the sequel series then. However, at the very end of the Mushoku Tensei series, we get a chapter called Prologue 0, which explains what took place in the future to lead to Nanahoshi's entire situation, as well as, by sheer accident, to Rudius being reincarnated. The contents of Prologue 0 are something I'll probably make another video about, because it feeds into so many theories I have about what might happen in the sequel, and strangely, even feeds into some theories I have about an entirely different series, ReZero. Given the author has said ReZero was a big inspiration for it, and given he's friends with ReZero author Tappei Nagatsuki, and so may well have discussed certain ideas with him. If you're a ReZero fan, you'll definitely see the parallels here, but that's literally another story. In terms of what Prologue 0 means with regards to explaining the teleportation incident, it basically confirms that Nanahoshi was right in her assumptions that the future was the cause, and it tells us exactly how it worked. In the future, there is a blessed child, or Miko, with the ability to turn back time, though only by up to 24 hours. If you want to know more about Mikos in general, then check out my video about Zenoba, as it's explained there. But as with most Mikos, this girl is valued very heavily by the country she's born in, and is used as a tool by the king. Her name is taken from her, as Mikos, unless they happen to be royalty like Zenoba, just end up being referred to as Miko, and she leads a miserable life of doing whatever the king wants her to do. However, there is another aspect to her ability, and that's that she's stuck in a permanent time loop. She keeps on repeating the same life over and over again, being reborn in the past every time she dies. Every lifetime is the same, different details, but it's always the same hell of being used by her kingdom and nothing more. It's never stated which kingdom or king the Miko was used by, though we learn later on that the site where the mass teleportation incident was centred, the city of Roa in the Fitua region, where Eris had previously lived, was where everything changed. Given the Fitua region is in the kingdom of Azura, it can be speculated that Azura is the kingdom in question. Still, the Miko always died young, and she died horribly in every loop. Plus, her memories of her deaths would remain intact. After countless repetitions, she just goes through the motions now, until one special loop. Here she's made to supply mana to a summoning circle designed by the kingdom's magic knight, a woman whose identity we're not really told, so it's hard to say if she's related to any characters we know of. This summoning circle is built to run off of the special mana of the Playback Miko, and it's intended to summon a hero from another world, because the kingdom's prophet had said that this was how they could win the coming war. The circle sucks up the Miko's mana, and the way this is described is very similar to how the magic circles Nanahoshi made suck up Rudius's mana, so it's a strangely familiar scene. And then a boy comes through. He speaks only Japanese, but for some reason the Miko finds she can understand him. She wonders if this is because her magic was used to bring him, but there is no clear answer as to why. The boy asks her name, which is something nobody has ever done before, and she remembers her name before she became just the Miko, and it was Riria. The king frees her of her usual duties now, as the country's hopes are all staked on the boy, and she's tasked with being his interpreter. Now her life is interesting and pleasant for the first time, as she walks around talking to him, along with the Magic Knight. She translates the questions the boy has about the new world, and the answers the Magic Knight, who seems to know everything, gives. And for the first time, the Miko actually gets to learn more about the world around her. She also listens with fascination to the boy's stories about his other world, and unbeknownst to him, she falls in love with him. But this boy, Akihito Shinawara, is not a special hero. He was just a normal high school boy, Nanahoshi's boyfriend, in fact. And like Nanahoshi, as someone summoned to this world rather than born in it like Rudius, he can't use magic. The kingdom also had such faith in the idea of the hero from another world that it seems they didn't really bother to teach him about war or fighting either. As a result, he is instantly killed by beheading on the battlefield. The Playback Miko would normally have been able to revive him, but by the time she finds his body, more than 24 hours have passed, so there seems to be nothing she can do. The kingdom is defeated, and she's captured and killed too. However, in her dying moments, driven on by how much different this life had been because of the boy, and by how now she had a reason to want to live, she burns through all of her power with one wish, for them both to live and to be able to live together. And now we get to the final part of the final chapter of Mushoku Tensei, and I'm actually going to read this out. This is from a fan translation of the free web novel version. The girl's power reached the past. Armoured Dragon Calendar Year 400. Fitawa Region, Roa Town. The place where the boy lost his life. A rift in time-space appeared above its skies. Inside that rift, there was a being which had a strong relationship with the boy. That being carried the same wish as that of the girl, who wanted to live together with the boy. Therefore, in order to make a future where the boy is saved, the being would change the world accordingly, and a path of life would be made for the boy. As a result, in Armoured Dragon Calendar Year 500, the boy would be saved. Or so it should have been. No matter how powerful her ability, the deed of creating a being in the past, which normally shouldn't exist, was impossible even for the girl. Even though the rift in space-time existed, it never materialized into the world. The power of the girl and the power of the world clashed against each other. K400, K401, K403. The world continued without any change. But during that time, a single soul went astray and passed the rift in space-time. That soul had no connections with the boy in any way. At the time of the boy's teleportation, at the time when the girl's power was summoning a being, the soul of that person simply died, near to those phenomenons. However, because it was in a state of being a soul, the soul found an opening, and passed through the rift in space-time that had been stopped by the world, and thus the soul was able to enter said world. And after unsteadily loitering around, just when it was about to lose spirit, it entered a baby. The wielder of that soul was named Rudeus Greyrat. The existence of Rudeus Greyrat was only slight, but the world definitely changed. The ideology of Roxy Megurdia changed, the history of Sylphiette was thrown out of order, and Eris Boreas Greyrat was granted wisdom. Those actions weakened the resistance of the world, and thus the rift in space-time expanded. And then, in Armoured Dragon calendar year 417, Nanahoshi Shizuka was summoned into the world. However, the existence of Rudeus Greyrat changed the order of the world more than the girl had wished for. Originally, the change was only intended to save the boy's life. However, that alone was inexcusable. History took a sudden change and started walking towards a future unbeknownst to anyone. The world changed. It was unknown whether the change was what the girl had wished for. But a few years after Rudius's death, the girl was reborn. As payment for the loop, nearly all of her powers were drained from her, and only a shell of the Miko was born. In order to fulfill her wish, she was born into the final world. No one knew whether or not the girl would survive until the end. And that's how Mushoku Tensei ends, very clearly setting up the importance of the Miko, Akihito and Nanahoshi for the sequel series, and also explaining everything about Rudeus's reincarnation, Nanahoshi, and the mass teleportation incident. Basically, as the Miko exhausted her powers, a rift was opened up in the place where the boy had died, 100 years earlier than his death, and inside it was Nanahoshi, the being who also wished to be with Akihito, and who could create ways for him to succeed when he arrived later. But the Miko's powers weren't enough to bring her to the world properly, and the world itself resisted this. But by sheer accident, the soul of Rudeus, who had died close to where Akihito and Nanahoshi were, passed through the rift, and eventually made its way into Zenith's child, who would otherwise have been stillborn. As Rudeus, someone who shouldn't have been in the world, made more and more changes to the futures of people with strong fates, like Roxy, Sylphiette and Eris, the world became less able to resist the rift. This is represented by the growing red gem in the sky. Eventually the turning point came when the rift won out over the world, and Nanahoshi was brought over, causing the mana calamity that resulted in the mass teleportation incident. Rudeus wasn't supposed to be summoned, and wasn't part of anybody in this world's plans, unlike Nanahoshi and Akihito, but it was because he wasn't expected or accounted for by anybody that his actions created a completely different future, which is referred to here as the final world, and which is also seen in many ways as the final loop by Orsted. Now, in this final world, the one where Rudeus exists and Nanahoshi is transferred over 10 years later, the Playback Miko herself is reborn, and this would be around 80 years after Rudeus is born, given it's said to be a few years after his death, and he dies at 74. But because she burned through her powers and is reborn without them, so could potentially be a normal girl here. How they would summon Akihito without her mana is a question, though in this loop Nanahoshi exists and knows all about summoning magic, so perhaps a magic circle that runs specifically off the Playback Miko's mana wouldn't be needed. I guess all of this will be discussed in the sequel. But yes, that's the answer to why the mass teleportation incident occurred, as well as the answer to how Rudeus ended up being reincarnated in the first place. I think a lot of people assumed his reincarnation was something to do with Hitagami, where we're so used to isekai stories where reincarnation is controlled by a god-type character. But actually, he had nothing to do with any of this, and couldn't even see Rudeus until the mass teleportation incident itself. There's a whole lot going on in this setting and story, and it's interesting to think that while none of it could happen without Rudeus, including none of the important stuff that will happen after he dies, as we see hints of here, him being in this world was simply by chance. By dying close to the real targets of the isekai story, he not only got a chance for his own redemption and to live a good life, but he also changed the future in ways we're still to see fully explored. But what do you guys think? I know this was a long video and contained a lot of big things from the story, so I hope I explained it all okay. I'd be really interested to hear what you think about this, whether you've read the story yourself or you just watched this for spoilers. To me, it's one of the most interesting things in the series, because I always like the underlying mysteries and stuff in these kinds of stories, but it does make for some headaches to try and figure out how time actually works in this world when there are multiple characters in loops, and also when another time-related thing I didn't talk about in this video is taken into account. What's also interesting is that, unlike ReZero, which makes it clear there's stuff like this going on from the very beginning due to Subaru's own time loop ability, the time elements in Mushoku Tensei seem pretty linear at first, and it's only when Orsted first appears that we even have a hint that Rudeus's experiences may not be the only timeline some people in this world have known. Still, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon who are on screen right now, and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.